So last time we dealt with our Twitter application, we implemented being able to get the friends timeline as well as getting the public timeline on the episode before that. However, now that we have both the friends and the public timeline, wouldn't it be nice if we could update Twitter? Yes, it would. So that's what we'll be going doing in this week. We'll be figuring out how to send a post request back to Twitter so that we can update our status. Coming up in Hot Cocoa, episode 10. Now that we've got our Twitter app receiving the public timeline and receiving the friends timeline, the next logical step would seem to be to give it the ability to actually post back to Twitter, which is always a useful thing after all. What good is it if you can only read it? So to begin, we'll go back and open up our project, and I'll pick up from where we left off in episode 8. There we go. And first, let's set up the interface for the posting of tweets. And within the interface, as Interface Builder loads here, we will need an NS button and an NS text field. So let's put Xcode in the background there. And let's see, yeah, that's off. All right. So let's go into the library and get our text field. And there's our text field. And let's stick that, right about there. And our button. Use this one again. And we'll put that right about there. And we'll call that, not SNED. Let's call it send. Unless you can SNED updates to Twitter, which I doubt. There we go. And let's size that back up there and get the auto sizing set up here. So we want this to be linked to the four corners, or the three corners rather, down at the bottom. So we'll turn off top at that, and we want it to stretch horizontally. And for the button, we don't want it to stretch at all, but we want it to be linked to the bottom right corner. And back here, we would also like that button to be disabled by default, because we don't want them to try and send an update before they logged in, because that's just silly. And also, we're going to, if you click in this box here and hit the return key, we're going to set the key equivalent of this button to the return key, because that's just a really easy way to set up so that if you type text in here and then hit enter or return, then it'll click this button for you instead of having to click it yourself. And there are ways of doing that without needing a button here, where if you just hit enter and in the text field is active, then it will also send it. But this is the easiest way to do it, and it means you can also click the button if you really want to. So we'll save that and head back over to Xcode. There we go. And set up our header file here for the things we just added. So we need an IB outlet for the NS text field. And we're going to call that one update text. Update text. And we need an IB outlet for the NS button. And we will call that send update. Button. And you'll notice normally we only have actions on buttons, but you can also have outlets and actions on buttons. And the reason we need an outlet this time is because since we have it disabled by default, we need to be able to talk back to it to enable it, and that's why we need that outlet. And then down in our IB actions, down here, we only need one more, which we're going to call IB action. This will be send, update, and again, this will be id and sender. We'll save that and get that out of the way for a second and go back and start linking our things here. So we need to drag from the app controller to the text field, set that as update text, from the app controller to the button, set that as send update button, and then from the button to the app controller and set that as send update. And save that. And then head back over to Interface Builder. And over our M file, so let me copy and paste the first part right from there. Over to the M file, and let's see, let's just stick it right here, right above the Get Friends timeline for username. Like that. And close your bracket there. It's a good idea to just go and close it before you even write any code. And actually, if you really prefer that way, there's a setting in Xcode, which is under one of these tabs. Not that one. Maybe underneath it. There we go. If you check automatic insert closing bracket, then whenever you make an opening bracket, like so, it'll automatically close it for you. And that way you don't forget to do it later. And then I believe it also does the same thing for like if loops. So if you do an if loop there you go. And it automatically places your cursor right in the center, so you don't have to, get your cursor back up to where it used to be. So I'm going to go and paste the code in here, and then we'll see how it works. So I've got the code pasted in here, and we'll go over how it works. And you'll notice it's actually pretty similar to what we did before, except if you read in the Twitter API, we actually need to send this as a post instead of a get, and that's because we're sending stuff to Twitter instead of getting stuff from them. So our first line here just starts the animation for the progress spinner. The next one gets the text from the update text field and puts that into the NSString status. We then set trim text to status here, and we check and make sure that if it's longer than 140 characters, then we want to trim it down to be less than 140 characters, because otherwise Twitter will be mad at us, because we're only allowed to send 140 characters. The next here is I'm using the method string by adding %escapes using encoding in UTF-8 string encoding method of NSString. And what that allows me to do is, normally when you send a URL and you send it just as text, unless you %escape it by putting a % in front of characters that it may interpret as something other than the character you want to. Like, for example, the AND symbol. Normally the AND symbol differentiates between one thing that you're sending and another if you're sending more than one thing at once. Like, if we were sending more than the status here, it would be status and reply ID equals. If you want to have it so that someone can actually have that AND symbol in their status, you need to add a % before it, because otherwise it's going to interpret it as an AND that actually means something and not an AND that's just a part of the text. And that's what this method does. It takes anything that's not part of the regular character set and then encodes that using %escapes so that we can send it as a regular URL and not have it be screwed up. And the UTF-8 string encoding, which is actually a parameter and not part of the method itself, this is just the method here, that should encode it, I believe, if you put foreign characters in, such as like Japanese, for example. That should encode it, I believe, so that we can send Unicode strings through the URL. I'm not entirely sure though, because I haven't tested that, but I'm hoping it will. And then this is pretty much the same as it was before. We have NSString, and we're creating a URL string here, and we're using the string with format like before. The only real difference is the string that we're sending. And here you'll notice I've changed it from HTTP to HTTPS, which means we get a secure connection to the server, so we're not like sending your username and password in the clear. And that's probably a good idea to change the friends timeline getting to a secure connection as well, because you're sending people's username and passwords. And then we're using the update.xml and statuses here. And because we're actually sending and not getting, I believe this ending here only affects whatever it sends back to us, like whatever the status code or whatever it sends back to us, how that's formatted. And we'll move this again here. And then we have the status, which we append onto there. And instead of, this time I'm just pulling the username field, and I'm pulling it straight from the username and password field instead of getting it from the variable, because this is an IP action, whereas the other one was just a void method where we passed the username and password in from the method that showed the login panel. Well, since presumably we've already showed the login panel, because we won't enable the login button unless we won't enable the send button unless they've already logged in. So presumably they've already entered their username and password, but if not, Twitter will give us an error. And then we take the encoded status and tack it onto the end there. And this is pretty much the same. We create the URL with the URL string there. Well, this is a tiny bit different, where we need this to be a mutable URL request, and this here needs to be a mutable URL request as well. And the reason for that is because down here we're going to set its HTTP method to post, because in the Twitter API it says this needs to be a post request instead of a GET request. So that's what we're doing this here. We take the URL request and set the HTTP method to post. And everything else here is pretty much exactly the same as it is in the other two, except for we're not handling any of the XML data here, since we're just sending a status. And then we stop the progress animation here. And there's also one more bit of code that we need to add to the end login window here, which is we need to have the update status button, which I believe is what we called it. Oh, it's send update button. Oops. Send update button. And we need to set enabled to true, so that when the login window is done, then they can set that to true. And let's see if this works. We'll build and go here, save all, and it'll compile. And here's our Twitter app. Notice if we resize, everything resizes with it, except for this login button. We'll need to fix that so that it resizes as well. So first thing, let's log in. I'll log into mine. Oops, that's not the right password. Log in, and it worked. We got our timeline here. And let's see if I can update my status. Recording. Hot Cocoa 10. Now. And we'll hit enter to make sure the button works, or the return key rather. That works. There we go. And if we then subsequently go to our Twitter page, twitter.com. Oops. Forgot. They don't use subdomains. Twitter.com/Trevor. There we go. Right there. There we go. Recording Hot Cocoa 10 now. And you'll notice that it actually says it was sent from web. And the reason that is because we don't have an application ID. And once you've developed your app and gotten it working, you can send stuff to Twitter service without needing an app ID, as long as you have a username and password. But if you want your application to have something nice like this, then you'll need to, if you go to the API, one of the FAQ questions there is, how do I get my application's name on the update? And there's a link to a form that you can fill out once your application's done, and submit that to Twitter, and then they'll let you have a little app ID right there. So that's it for this episode. In the next episode that we look at our Twitter application, we're going to do a bit of cleaning, if you will. The problem with this application is it works, but it's not polished. This is basically just us getting the code ready and making sure that we can actually program it. But it's not the best way to write it. For one, the login button stays as a login button, so you can't change it, for example, to like, I'd like to refresh my friend's timeline. Well, if you want to do that, you're going to have to go back to the login and hit login over and over again, which is not ideal. A refresh button would be nice. So we'll set up the login differently. And also, if we look at the source code here, there's a lot of redundant code here. All of this sending requests and URL strings and all, we do that like once for every time we want to do anything with this server. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to break that off into its own class. So that way we can just import that class in our header whenever we want to send anything to Twitter. And we're going to reuse the same URL, sending request, etc. every time we want to send a new message. So that way our code will be much cleaner, it'll be organized, and it'll be in one spot. And that way we don't have to keep cutting and pasting all of this URL request stuff every time we want to do this. And another cleanup thing we need to do is, up until now, we've been using a synchronous request, which basically you'll notice if we run the application here and we log in like that, hit login, it pretty much freezes the application until it either gets a response or the 30-second timeout interval is up, which is fine if you really need the application to wait until you have that data before the user can do anything else. But that's not ideal in this situation. We want the user to be able to do other things while we're waiting for Twitter to send us the timeline. So we're going to change those to be using an asynchronous request instead of a synchronous request, so that we can continue doing stuff while that works in the background, so it doesn't just halt our entire application while we wait for Twitter. So all of that and more coming up on the next episode of Hot Cocoa. See you then. That was not the right off button. Oh, let's try this.